Did you know that in the midst of oppression and despair, God can raise up an unexpected leader? A man with no fame, no great resources, but with unshakable faith. This is Othniel, a judge who not only conquered a city, but brought deliverance to an entire people. Get ready to discover a story of courage and faith that transformed Israel and teaches us about true freedom in God. Stay with us and see how, even in times of crisis, God always raises those who are willing to hear his voice and act. Othniel was born at a time when the people of Israel still carried the dust of the desert on their feet and held in their hearts the fresh promises of a future in Canaan. It was a time of transition. Joshua had conquered the promised land, but the people were still trying to understand how to live in it. Amid tribes, disputes, and memories of Egypt, a boy rose up in the tribe of Judah, one of the strongest in Israel. His name, Othniel, son of Kenaz and nephew of Caleb, the legendary warrior who, even in old age, asked for a mountain to conquer. Growing up in the shadow of someone like Caleb was no easy task, but Othniel wasn't the type to hide. From a young age, he saw in his uncle more than a war hero. He saw a man who truly trusted God, and that touched him deeply. Othniel learned to fight, of course. Every boy in Judah did, but he also learned to listen. He heard the stories of the sea that opened, the manna that fell from heaven, the walls of Jericho that collapsed. With every story, something burned inside him. It was as if, without knowing it, he was being prepared for something much greater. The people were living in a time of remembrance and forgetfulness. They began to drift from the faith, blending with neighboring cultures and forgetting the one who had delivered them. But Othniel, he was different. Quiet, observant, steadfast. He didn't seek attention, but he was not overlooked. While others looked for safety in cities, he seemed more concerned with God's voice. And it was exactly this attitude that caught Caleb's attention. When the moment came to issue a challenge, Caleb didn't hesitate. Though already old, his eyes still burned with the fire of someone who dreamed of battles. He rose and made a proclamation. "Whoever conquers the city of Kiriath-Sepher will receive the hand of my daughter Achsah in marriage." It was a bold challenge, straightforward and without pretense. Not just a test of strength, but of courage, vision, and faith. The city was fortified, an enemy stronghold. Many trembled, others looked away. But in the silence, one figure stood up, Othniel. He didn't come with pomp or speeches. He simply prepared and went. As if that moment had already been written, he marched toward the enemy city. And when he returned, his hands were not empty. When Kiriath-Sepher fell, it wasn't just a military victory, it was a turning point. Othniel proved he wasn't just Caleb's relative, but a man of God, forged in faith and tempered in battle. Achsah, in turn, was no ordinary woman. Intelligent, strong, and determined, she saw in Othniel more than a conqueror. She saw a partner, someone with whom she could dream great dreams. And so they were united, not only by an arranged marriage, but by a shared mission. Soon after the wedding, Achsah made an unusual request. She turned to Othniel and said, "Ask my father for a blessing, a piece of land with water springs." A bold request. In times of drought and territorial disputes, water sources were everything. Sustenance, life, future. And Caleb, recognizing the wisdom of his daughter and the boldness of his son-in-law, granted her both the upper and lower springs. On the surface, it seemed like just fertile land, but between the lines of that request, something greater was being nurtured, as if God were watering the ground where soon his people would need to flourish again. Achsah wasn't the type to accept things without question. She had her father's boldness and the wisdom of someone who sees beyond. When she asked Othniel to speak to Caleb about the land, it wasn't just for comfort, it was for vision. She knew the future couldn't be built on dry ground. In her meeting with Caleb, Achsah took the lead. She mounted her donkey and got straight to the point. "Give me a blessing," she said with the firmness of someone who knows exactly what she wants. "You have already given me land in the Negev. Now give me springs of water." It was as if she were saying, "What we have is good, but it's not enough to sustain what God is yet to do." Caleb did not hesitate. He gave her the upper and lower springs, a generous gift. 2 springs, 2 paths of provision, a clear symbol that God doesn't give the minimum, but what is necessary to overflow. While many were still trying to find their place in that new land, Othniel and Achsah already had fertile soil, flowing water, and a purpose in their hearts. But not everything was peaceful. The people around them were lost. Joshua, the great leader, had already died. The tribes began to drift apart, each going its own way. The enemies, once held back, were rising again. And in the midst of it all, the people's faith began to wither. Slowly, like water slipping through fingers, the covenant with God was replaced by idols, strange rituals, and empty promises. Othniel watched everything. He sensed in the air that something was wrong, as if a shadow was forming on the horizon, and that shadow had a name. It came from afar. It didn't take long for that shadow to take form. His name was Cushan-Rishathaim, a powerful foreign king from Mesopotamia. Even his name sounded strange, heavy, as if it carried the stench of oppression. When he arrived, he didn't ask for permission. He came with armies, shouts, and a fierce desire to dominate, and he succeeded. For 8 years, the people of Israel lived under the rule of this enemy. Israel was no longer free. They worked for others, feared for their lives, and forgot who they were. Their identity, once rooted in the promises of God, was now buried under layers of oppression and silence. But God never forgets his people. In the midst of suffering, something began to stir. The people, weary of pain, began to cry out. Not just screams of anguish, but prayers, real, broken, and desperate prayers. And heaven listened. God, who had been watching in silence, rose up. He heard the cries of his people and chose someone unexpected to lead them. Not a king, not a man of great wealth or fame, but a man of courage, faith, and obedience, Othniel. The same man who had once conquered a fortified city. The same man who had honored his wife's request for water and vision. The same quiet, firm man who never sought the spotlight, but whose eyes had always been on God. That man was about to rise, not by his own strength, but by the Spirit of the Lord. Judges tells us, the Spirit of the Lord came upon him, so that he became Israel's judge and went to war. The Lord gave Cushan-Rishathaim, king of Aram, into the hands of Othniel, who overpowered him. It wasn't just a physical victory, it was a spiritual awakening. The man who listened to stories as a child now became the protagonist of a new chapter in Israel's history. Othniel's leadership brought peace to the land for 40 years. A generation could live in safety, rebuild their homes, and rediscover the path to God, all because one man chose to obey when God called. Othniel didn't wait for the perfect conditions. He didn't ask for signs or favors. When God moved, he responded. His story teaches us that true leadership is not about titles but about surrender. It's about being available when others run, about hearing God's whisper when others are distracted by noise. Othniel was the first judge of Israel, and his legacy reminds us that no act of faith is ever wasted. And what about us? In a world filled with confusion, noise, and false idols, are we willing to be like Othniel, quiet, firm, listening? Are we willing to stand when everyone else falls? The God who raised Othniel in the midst of darkness is the same God who calls you today. He still lifts the humble, empowers the weak, and turns faith into victory. And so, Othniel's story teaches us that even in the most difficult times, there is always an opportunity to rise up in faith and overcome. If you were touched by this message and want to know more about stories that transformed lives, subscribe to the Bible and Faith channel. Here, we share powerful reflections and teachings that can change your life. Don't forget to activate the bell so you don't miss any videos and be part of this journey of faith with us. Until the next video.